Morning Majority on 630 WMAL.
6:07 on the Morning Majority. Good Friday to you. Brian Eman, KT McFarland, Fox News national security analyst. Mary Walter in this morning. Joined now by Peter Morici, University of Maryland economist, and a great guy overall. Good morning, Peter. How are you?
Good morning.
So let's talk about Japan first of all. Obviously, we're all worried about the human loss, but what effect does this have on their economy, number one, moving forward, and the global economy also?
Well, in terms of their economy, they're going to have trouble getting things started again. While things happened in a rural area, the supply chain in Japan and globally is so intertwined and so dispersed. It doesn't take much in one place to shut down operations in another. For example, a GM pickup truck factory was shut yesterday or the day before because it can't get parts from Japan. Mercedes, BMW use gearboxes from Japan, believe it or not, and so they're shutting down lines.
Now, when you look at a competitor like Toyota, and you mentioned that GM's having problems, but does this bode well for people who compete against Hyundai and Toyota and Sony? Will they be hurt in the short term?
Well, the folks that compete against Nissan and Toyota will be advantaged. Although Toyota makes, say, 70% of its cars sold in the United States, right, it uses a lot of critical components from Japan. Those cars will come into short supply, and that'll be a boost for Ford and General Motors. Not just immediately, but they're making better cars these days, especially mid-sized cars like the Fusion and the Malibu. And once people switch, they might not switch back. They may keep the car buyer for a couple of generations of cars. So there's that. The other thing is the Japanese economy, we have to recognize, has been declining, and that it has been contracting because of basically the population getting older. They don't have any population growth. Not enough young people. And as a consequence, this may encourage Japanese companies to take operations abroad more quickly than they have been.
Our economy was contracting in 2001 when we got hit by Al-Qaeda. What did the U.S. do right after 9/11? What did we do wrong? And is Japan following in our footsteps of figuring out what we did?
Well, it's not so much the Al-Qaeda thing that ripped the U.S. economy. But you got to remember, the U.S. economy has a growing population. Japan doesn't have that. They've had an implicit two-child policy now since World War II. And as a consequence, they're just getting older. We have immigration. Americans don't necessarily reproduce themselves, but we have heavy immigration. They don't. That's the difference.
Right. Now, what about the farming, and how is that going to affect economies? Because their farming area was pretty much wiped out by this. So now they're going to have to import more food, and we're seeing food prices go up here in the U.S. Is that their lack of farming now being wiped out? Is that going to affect us too?
Well, it's not their entire agricultural area, but they're going to lose agricultural capability. And in the short term, food prices are going to go up. Longer term, food prices are going up not just because of what happened in Japan, but what's happening in China. The Chinese people are becoming more wealthy, so they're moving up the food chain. They're not eating just rice anymore. For example, when a child drinks milk, you have to grow corn to feed the cow to make the milk, and that's much more taxing on the food system. So food prices were going to be rising anyway, and we have left the era of plentiful food. That is, more food than the world can consume, and we're likely to see more of a balance between supply and demand, and with that, rising prices as demand grows in Asia.
Peter, this is KT McFarland. I have two questions for you. Japan is the second largest foreign holder of U.S. debt. Are they going to start dumping some of that debt to pay for their own rebuilding?
They have to. They have to sell assets abroad.
So that means our interest rates are going to go up, and our ability to borrow money to finance our deficit is going to be decreased, right?
Well, it will be unless the Fed prints more money to keep the interest rates from rising. That's right. And either way, it's inflationary, because what really matters here is not whether you have more dollars in yen, but rather whether you have more dollars in yen chasing the same goods. And they will be chasing the same goods because they'll be chasing building materials, the very kinds of things that Chinese have been driving up in price. So we will be facing inflationary pressures, not just in food, but additional inflationary pressures in building commodities, things like copper, lumber, gypsum, things of that nature.
And then a second question, oil. Japan is the world's, I think, third largest importer of oil. How is this going to affect the price of oil, while at the same time we may have another, a problem with oil in either the Gulf or in Libya?
Well, near term, the demand for oil goes down because the Japanese can't use it.
Right.
But a month from now, 2-3 months from now, the Japanese are going to be importing more energy, including oil, because of the loss of the nuclear capacity. They have to compensate for that. So that will mean somewhat higher oil prices. That, along with demand continuing to grow in China, we were all projecting, the economists in our forecasts, higher oil prices for this year than last, and a continuing trend in that direction. What's happened is they've jumped more rapidly than we expected. Now that's having a salutary effect, because we're looking at gasoline prices 40-50 cents a gallon higher now than we anticipated, and that's good for a 0.5 percentage point of GDP growth, or 5 to
It's not so great if you're driving a car.
You talked about inflation, and Bernanke is often questioned about that, and he never seems to be too worried about it. Do you think behind the scenes he is worried about it, and should he be worried about it?
Yeah. Remember, he's my age, and all the guys my age, as adolescents, read Mad Magazine.
Yeah.
If you recall, the motto was "What me worry,"
Yeah.
And it's almost as if poor Ben, if he ever says he's got a concern, then that causes a panic.
That's true.
But I mean, I don't think you can find an economic forecaster with two legs that doesn't think we're going to have inflation year over year above 3% this summer. That's something to worry about. And you can only focus on the core so much. I mean, if you have the whole idea behind focusing on the core was that oil prices go up and they come down. But it seems as though oil prices only go up. They go up, they come down, but the trend is always up and more rapidly than the core. At some point, you have to back off and say, we have inflation.
Yeah.
But the problem is with 8 or 9% unemployment outside, and so many other policies being pursued by the federal government that he is disinclined to talk about. If I was in his job, I would. That slow growth, it is a very difficult box to sit in. It's very, very hard for him, given, the very expensive health care law, the Social Security problem, the exchange rate policy towards China, the general weakness of this administration when it comes to making tough choices. They know how to spend more money, and they know how to lambaste oil companies and the rich, but they really don't know how to do the tough things. There's a real courage deficit in this country, and its point center is the Oval Office.
We've noticed that.
Yes.
Hey, before we let you go, I know you're hosting the show on Saturday, 4 to 7 here on WMAL. I got to ask you, because it's March Madness. Do you really think that it has any effect on the economies? People say that the things just go blank for
only if my state of mind affects the global economy. I mean, that's absurd.
Not a global economy, the U.S. economy.
Go. Why don't we take up palmistry? I mean, they got a lot of those around Washington. We can go ask those folks.
So I guess the answer is no. All right. Thank you, Peter. I appreciate it as always. We'll be listening Saturday, 4 to 7 here on WMAL. Peter Morici, University of Maryland College. You read the stories all the time.
Exactly, about how productivity goes down.
Productivity down.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like
birth rates go up 9 months after we have a blackout.
Come on, haven't you ever worked someplace where people sit around the TV, especially towards the end of March Madness, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and people are around a television watching the game? Nothing's getting done.
My wife, who doesn't really care much about sports, works at a hospital, and she knew all the scores when she came home yesterday. I'm like, okay, things are getting done. Good thing I'm not in the hospital. Good thing I'm not dying.